never stop learning. And I think that's so important. You got to go outbound. People are like, I read the internet all the time. No, man, like really try to find the fun in really going to seminars and really formally learning every day, pushing yourself out there, not learning to try to meet a narrative, but learning to really absorb, the kind of learning where it hurts you to find out things that maybe you thought you were wrong or things that you were mistaken, but they can help you.
Hey, everybody. My name's Ryan Atkinson, and you are on the Business Cloud. We've got a phenomenal guest coming on today. From starting a business right after high school to being a stand-up comedian at 19, even being an actor, and then launching a multi-million-dollar a year company. I'm excited to talk about a lot of experience. So I want to welcome Michael Stein to the podcast, the founder of Abadak, to the podcast. Thank you so much for being here, Michael. I'm so excited to have you on.
My pleasure. Thank you.
I'm glad I asked beforehand about the La La Land if you're a restaurant dancer, because that was actually my opening question, which I think is very funny that it's actually on IMDb.
Yeah, IMDb gave me a credit, which I did not do, but then you correct them, but that's not mine. My credits, my first acting role was playing Dirk Diggler in the Dirk Diggler Story, which became Boogie Nights, which I appear in as well. And from then on, I started writing, directing, and producing my own thing, starting with documentaries. And then I did an award-winning short film called Rituals and Resolutions, which got bought by HBO and almost got me a movie deal. But after a couple of years of development hell, no movie deal. So then I said, screw it. I'm going to make my own film. But I was broken in debt and I didn't have any money. So I was like, how am I going to do this? So I decided to become an entrepreneur, which I was earlier in my career. That's what I grew up with, entrepreneurship. A lot of hills and valleys of that. But then I started something on the internet when the internet was still young. And within 6 months, I had enough money to make my movie. And I wrote, directed, produced, and acted in a movie called Love Hollywood Style with Faye Dunaway, Andy Dick, and Coolio, and many other names and faces that you would recognize. And it didn't make its money back. It did decent,
Yeah.
And I said, screw this. I'm going to continue to build this business that I started. And since then, it's made it well over $100 million, and it continues to grow today. And that's kind of like, the second half of my journey as far as entrepreneurship is concerned.
Yeah. I think that's so cool because you started a business you were so young. You've done comedy, you've directed movies. I do want to ask about that though, because I've actually never had someone on that's like a filmmaker on before. What's the process that goes into making a documentary or some sort of film? If you could lay out a blueprint, what even goes into this? I have no idea.
Well, it's just like any other project. It's like starting a business or anything else. Preparation is 95% success, but you don't know that at the beginning. So you're kind of winging it. And they didn't have when I started doing filming, there was no internet. This was in the early 90s. So and even in film, so you learn a little slower than you can now. You can't YouTube it back then, but the way you get started now is much different than how I started. My first film was. I saw the opportunity. I saw one of my friends was a successful filmmaker. So I said, I want to do the same thing. And I was promoting nightclubs. It was one of my first big, careers was a nightclub promoter in LA.
Nightclubs, nice.
And I said, I could do a documentary on the history of LA clubs, get a lot of people to come. So I did a documentary. I filmed everybody. I had my friend help me edit it. And I said, I should do this around the country because raves were starting to become big in the early 90s. So I said, I'm going to do a documentary on the history of house music and raves. So I planned events all around the country for 4 months and I just made a documentary. And that was the greatest learning ground. A lot of mistakes and a lot of successes of learning every day, getting up. What kind of questions am I going to ask? How am I going to shoot them? What can that segue? It just can't be interviews. What kind of inserts am I going to have? How am I going to fill this? It was just 4 months of shooting and then 7 months of editing afterwards. And that was the first real film that I did. It was called Generation of Sound. It's called in the history of house music raves. And then from there, I did another documentary, but then I said, I want to do film. So I decided I'm going to leave the nightclub business. And I started working as a production assistant on commercials and music videos and some film. And that's what really, particularly commercials, because you get the best of the best in the business. People don't know that. People think it's film. Those film guys, when they're done shooting a film, they want to get the most money per day and per diem and all that. Your best DPs, your best, crew are working on commercials because a lot of money. And I got to see the beginning, middle, and end of a production because the film shoots are only 3 days long. The The pre is like 2 days. The prep is, like 3 days. The post is like 4 days. And you get, a lot of skill set in a fast amount of time. So I got to learn filmmaking by doing that for about 4 years. And then I did my film, Love Hollywood Stuff, or Rituals and Resolutions, which is a drama short, about half hour long. And that boded really well by doing that as my film school.
That's interesting. How old were you when you were like doing all these sets?
I was 29 when I did my short film, but when I started the documentary stuff, I was 23.
Wow.
So that was the first thing. That was the history of LA nightclubs. That was the first thing I did. It's called The Scene. And I did that. It was 1990.
Wow, that's incredible. And I like how you said this isn't the era of YouTube where you can just like figure everything out. How did you figure everything out? I mean, how did you figure everything out?
My natural knowledge was I've seen a lot of movies. I grew up watching a lot of movies. I have a movie, that was like, I didn't play sports, I watched a lot of movies. So then I was also at the time starting to read more scripts, and that got me the acumen to, start to, Spinal Tap I was a big fan of that, and that was like a mockumentary, but documentaries always fascinated me because it was a great way to learn as well.
Oh yeah.
So, you'd be surprised on what you can do by getting the, platinum series, behind the scenes, footage of how films are made without even going to film school. Watching movies, reading movies, and watching how movies are made will teach you a lot. Those three things.
Interesting. So do you view when you like watch a movie, this isn't just like your casual experience. Are you like dissecting everything that goes into a part of it? What's your movie experience like when you do watch movies?
It's weird. It's gone in stages, right? So when you're young, you watch a movie, it's reality, and then when you become a filmmaker, you're watching it, you're dissecting it. And then I got heavily involved in personal development and still am since I was in my early 20s as well. So then you start to look at things like, is this what's human needs psychology are these, the main characters trying to meet here? So they kind of mix all that, and then I studied acting since I was 15. So, you start to say, from the actor's perspective. So it's like a hodgepodge after a while. And as you get older, and that's why I think older actors make the best actors, is, as long as they hold on to their hunger, seen a lot of older actors that, lose the desire, with the dialogue on their chest to so that is that's the impetus to in a nutshell.
Interesting. I'm curious, like right off of that, then like, how do you hold on to your hunger? Because you just said, you got really interested in personal development in your young 20s, you're in your 30s now. It sounds like you're still very interested in personal development, which I think is really cool. So, I mean, how do you keep your hunger?
I think it's pattern building. So, I started off really slow because I grew up with ADHD and dyslexia and a weird stutter, and I had health issues. So, my progression was very slow. I was a slow learner. So the only success I had when I was a kid was making people laugh at me or making other people laugh, So, and then I found second success I saw the movie Rocky when I was 11 years old. And I was like, I want to be like this guy because he's like me. He's funny, but he doesn't succeed, but he keeps on getting back up when he gets knocked down. So then I became a physical fitness trainer when I was in high school at the local gym. I was like, oh, that's two things I have success in. So, but it still wasn't night and day. I was, I told my dad was an entrepreneur, and he was a New York homeless street kid, made millions, and then he lost it all to become homeless again. So I told my tutor in high school, the reason why I bring that up is because she goes, what do you want to do? I said, well, I don't want to go to college. I said, I'm starting a business in 2 weeks. The day after I graduate high school, I'm going to start a tool business like my dad did. And she says, and I said, I want to be an entrepreneur, an actor, and a stand-up comedian. And she goes, why don't you work with your hands? Because not everybody's meant to do what they want to do. And she said that like caringly, because she just knew that I was kind of like out there.
Yeah.
And I said, my dad never finished the 8th grade. I can do it. And I started that business, and I made 2 sales within like 1 hour. I was like, I envisioned I'm going to be in newspapers.
Yeah.
And then like 2 weeks go by, no sale. Like that was it. There was no sales. On those summertime, I'm 18 years old, and I was like, screw it. And I just took classes at the local city college because I wanted to learn acting, psychology, and business. And then within like a year later, I became a nightclub promoter. I did stand up when I was 19. I brought a lot of people there, and I said, I could do this with nightclubs, dance clubs. I could bring a lot of people. I could bring a lot of people there. And within 6 months, I became the #1 nightclub promoter in Los Angeles. So to answer your question, this has been a slow progression. So you build up patterns from a personal development standpoint. Is that I stay hungry because these patterns are built up to where it's a habit. It's not like, there's no romantic things like I was destined to be that, I use internal dialogue. There's something called the triad of emotions with personal development, where you have focus, physiology, and your words. And that dynamic, those three things will dictate over time with repetition, will dictate your emotions and will dictate how well you can trigger, because we're pattern driven, triggered, beings.
Yeah.
How well you can trigger your determination and your drive towards anything. So just now talking about it, my pattern, I could feel my eagerness getting up. I could feel my drive just rising, just because it's a habit. So it's habit building, it's pattern building, and that's, to answer your question, that's how I stay driven.
Interesting. It sounds like there are some like emotions there though, of like, you're hungry, like you're driven, but it is all from your habits of like your past experiences of just saying like, oh, I'm always going to go more and more and more.
Yeah. Well, you grow up, sometimes it's easier. The way I didn't grow up with education because my dad wasn't educated, but he was a hustler, he was a street hustler. And then he became a hustler. He was called the calculator kid. He sold these calculators. He was in the tool business. And his partner, Alan Smith, but they both failed. Alan Smith ended up in the 1975, after my dad left the tool business. Alan Smith started a company called Harbor Freight, which is a publicly traded company.
Yep.
And my dad did the calculators and Smitty was like not doing well, but my dad sold these calculators, called him the calculator kid. He made millions, but my dad had like these crazy lifestyle and famous orgy parties in LA, which the Burt Reynolds character loosely based on my dad and Boogie Nights, because the writer director was a friend of mine and he loved my dad. And he's like, just imagine that kind of lifestyle. And I grew up around that. And I figured, I could be the guy that at least finishes high school. But I was told my whole life that we're hustlers. This is in your creed. So when you start something at an early age, I was never educated and I was around a lot of volatile shit, but I always was told, no matter what, you're a hustler. That's who you are. That's in your DNA. So if you're going to believe, because we all believe bullshit or believe something, if you're going to believe bullshit, it's all bullshit. It's what you metastasize, and that's a negative connotation, but it is all what you decide to believe and build a pattern of that. One of my earliest patterns is that us Steins are hustlers, and that's in our creed. And so might not be able to know how to do something, but it's in our DNA to like just wake up every day and try to like make shit happen.
That's what I see as a common pattern of entrepreneurs is they jump into something and they have no idea how they're going to figure it out, but they do figure it out because you just jump in and you're like, oh shit, I have no idea how to do X, Y, and Z, but I'm going to figure out how to do X, Y, and Z. And then that sounds true to you as well.
I was like Groucho Marx said, I would not want to belong to a club that would have me as a member. And I didn't think I was hireable by anybody. So I was like, I got to be an entrepreneur like my dad, because I don't see anybody hiring me, and this is my only choice.
Yeah. I'm curious. I mean, how much of this is mindset as well? Because I just read a book, The Confident Mind by Dr. Nate Zizner, excuse me. Great book. It changed my mindset on just how I approach life and approach problems of figuring out and being really confident myself. So how much for you is it all mindset?
It's almost all mindset, not every inch, but when you think about it, it's so trite, but like you could just watch Empire Strikes Back and that'll teach you what you need to know in business. When Yoda's talking to Luke Skywalker, I was not to name drop, but I was with Peter Gruber one time. It was my girlfriend's dad. He was the most powerful man in Hollywood. And I was his nightclub promoter. And I'm just, the door opened for me because I did a party for the Batman movie in 1989. I was just a kid. And he's like, what do you want? Because they liked me. And I was afraid to take anything from this powerful man, but he did give me some good advice. And it was trite advice. And I thought it was bullshit at the time. I was like, I get that, but still. And I grew up in LA with a lot of poppycock, a lot of like mysticism, but it's not mysticism. Yeah. He says, what are you trying to do? Right? What do you do? No, he goes, what do you want to do? I said, well, I'm promoting the clubs right now. And he goes, well, what you want to do is own the nightclub, right? I was like, oh yeah, I'm trying to do that. And he goes, here, take this pencil. We can see that pencil. I'm like, yeah. He goes, move that. I'm at a restaurant. He goes, move the pencil. I moved the pencil. I go, did you try to do that or just do it? I was like, oh, come on. I know what you're talking about, but this is mindset. After a certain while, with time plus effort with me, it was like, working out, it took me a while, but the sooner as young as you are, as you realize, and you could start to see that matrix start to trickle down with ones and zeros, you go, wait a second. This is just time plus effort, building a pattern, realizing you could get close thereof to whatever you want to do, just as a matter of mindset. So, that's what it takes. I mean, everybody's listening to this shit. It's like there's so much parity between everybody on planet Earth.
Yeah.
It's just how much knowledge is potential power, and then taking that potential power and then, working your ass off to be in the right situation at the right time. So you have a cognitive understanding of like timing for opportunities to come along to take action. And then that unconscious competence that comes along with knowing all that information that is ineffable, undescribable, to where you can make it happen.
You said a word, power, and I feel like a superpower you have is storytelling. Just from our conversation so far, you have been an incredible storyteller. So I want to ask, I mean, how much would you contribute like storytelling to like your success? Because you are very, very good at storyteller, and everything's so concise and so in detail. How much would you contribute like your success to storytelling in itself?
I think it's a component of it, through wanting something. I was, once again, I didn't read. I wasn't good at vocabulary. My vocabulary wasn't well. I wasn't a reader, because I wanted to write screenplays so I can act in the damn thing. I wrote 8 screenplays, so my mom was a writer. That was her passion. My dad was a singer. They were performers. So you grow up around, and I studied over my words, but my mom looked like Marilyn Monroe, but had a personality like Don Rickles. So I would try to talk fast like my whole family, but I would stumble over my words. So, the only thing that could really get my attention is like telling jokes and then telling stories. So otherwise I was the youngest in a large family. You just can't survive. You need to find your own niche. So I've had practice. So by the time I did stand up when I was 19, it was very easy for me. But I believe that like there was disadvantages. Whenever you have a disadvantage, it turns into advantages, because like deaf people maybe can see better, and maybe blind people could hear better. I think that because I had these disadvantages, maybe it's given me advantages, not that there's some, supernatural thing, but I think it's helped with business as far as articulating, to my employees, to, people that I deal with business, to customers, to whatever, people that negotiating things. Once something's in my wheelhouse, like that Batman party, I was up in Aspen, and I was 22 years old, and I just turned 22, and I see my friend Chris Peters, his dad, it's John Peters, name dropping again, get your brooms out. So he goes, what have you been up to? I said, I've been promoting nightclubs. I said, what have you been up to? He goes, I want to promote nightclubs. And then I felt comfortable because that was in my wheelhouse. So we're sitting down, the two families, large group is sitting down at Mezzaluna and Aspen. And I take the floor, and I was able to tell everybody, you know what we need to do? We need to rent out the Park Plaza Hotel. We're going to have 5,000 people there. We're going to do the biggest party for a movie anybody's ever seen, for this big Batman movie, because it's this big event. This is 6 months before it came out. This is Christmas time. And because I was able to, I felt comfortable. And because I was, I grew up with a hustling kind of mentality, and I was comfortable with my, visualizing and then articulating what I visualized. That has helped me in business. That has helped me with negotiating. That's helped me with, trying to appeal to people. And also humbleness, self-deprecation, by the way, is really important.
Interesting. I think what's really cool for you is just like, you come from like a background where it's like, oh, like when I was so young, like everything, I was just like doubted. Like I had a stutter when I talked. I came from a family that, that wasn't college educated. You were in high school educated, your dad. I mean, to me, is it something like deep down inside, it's like, I have something to prove here. I have something that I want to prove that I can do this. Is that inside of you at all?
Yeah. I mean, there's something like, self-worth, or grow, everybody has, I was just talking about this with my daughter. There's primary questions that we all ask ourselves right now. I say, well, I ask myself a lot of questions throughout the day. I know, but everybody driving out there, there's some, if there's not a perfect science, but it's almost like a perfect art form, to where people do ask themselves primary questions. Yeah. And you might find one question dominating more than the other. So my primary question, I usually, and I don't want to, I give it too much creed, but it's just like, what do I need to do next? What do I need to do next? As we're just like, so you want to, that is a thing that I'm constantly, has been a pattern of mine. You want to smell those roses though. So like, something bad happens to you, you want to ask, not just what do I need to do next, but then be cognitive of what kind of questions you ask yourself. Are they empowering or disempowering questions? And that's helped me along the way, because I've asked myself questions like, when something bad's happened, I've had a crap load of bad things happen. I try to ask myself, knee jerk, out after I'm done, taking 20 seconds being miserable, which you need to, can't mask that. I ask myself, what's good about this? What can I learn from this? What's interesting about this? What's funny about this? Can I write about this? Those are empowering questions as opposed to, why does this always happen to me? So those are important things to ask yourself. Internal dialogue, once again.
Interesting. I like that mindset shift from like, oh, like this is really bad, but like, how can I like create something about this? That's a mindset shift that I don't think enough people have, where it's just like, oh, like this question that I'm asking myself sucks, but I can actually create something out of it. That's a beautiful mindset.
Yeah. A lot of this it can also, that back to that triad of emotions.
Yeah.
What you're focusing on, what your inner and outer dialogue is, and your facial expressions, and your whole your physiology and how it is, that ends up, if you want to be an actor, a business person walking into a meeting, stand-up comedy is big time. Because when I learned this in personal development, I started building that pattern right away to where, Eric Morris, great acting teacher, was my acting teacher. He does like a Superman exercise where you count your blessings and you really kind of, build up your ego in a healthy way, because you need your ego to work at all cylinders when you need to go on an audition or whatever. So you're sitting there, and then you need to work yourself into a positive state, a state that's real. So you got to do an inventory of things that are, going to enable you, in a powerful situation. So then when you feel powerful, you could do a physical act. You could do a physical move that you're always going to constantly do. And I kind of do that before I do stand-up. I haven't done stand-up in a while, pretty good clip at this point, because I'm concentrating more on my business. But, no matter what, if you feel like shit and you're like, well, I need to get out of this emotion because I need to go into this right now, then I'll do a certain move. And that's a link. And that's a neuro-linguistic programming type shit that actually really works, because we're pattern-driven beings.
Yeah. Before I get on every podcast episode, I always say to myself like 10 times before I get on, I go, this will be the best podcast I ever do. That's what I say every time before I get on, because it's just that mindset shift of going into it like, okay, I'm going to do this really damn well.
Yeah, that's great. And what really changed me for stand-up, when I started telling myself, because I don't, when you do standing or any kind of performing, any kind of business, you are servicing, right? So I'd go on there and I was like, I would kind of pace back and forth like Mike Tyson, because I love Tyson. I love the way he walks back and forth like a tiger in a ring before the fight. So I walked back and forth, and I was like, I can't wait to get out there and tell these people these stories. Yeah, and that changes it. It's not like I can't wait. I hope I'm good. I hope this works. I'm not worried about forgetting something. That time's gone. You had to set it and forget it, and learn it and then forget it. So I think that has to do with a mindset of just saying a little statement like that, and just saying, something that's not selfish, that's not inside you, that's something where you're trying to give somebody something. I think that's always more powerful. So like a podcast, like today, I was like, I can't wait to meet this person, Ryan. I'm being curious too. That was Einstein's favorite things. Like I attribute my success, paraphrasing, he said, to being curious. And that's what I think, like, you've done a lot of podcasts, right? You could do a bunch of podcasts. You're like, I'm tired this day, but like, if you get curious about the person you got to talk to next, that tiredness or that feeling goes away. I mean, probably right now you've done 60, 70 episodes. In the beginning, you're like, okay, I'm doing this now. But now that we're talking, your emotional state is totally different, right?
Oh, absolutely. And I think that's really important. I'm reading a book, Da Vinci right now by Walter Isaacson. Most curious person I've ever read about. Is just the detail and the observation that he put into like birds outside, trees. Like he studied the tongue of a woodpecker one time, like, because he was curious. Wow. Why are you so curious about this? And I think curiosity is a thing that I don't want to say a lot of people my age don't have, but I feel like a lot of people my age like don't have this curiosity about other people. That's why I love doing the podcast, because I'm curious about your background. Like, you have an incredible background.
Yeah, and that curiosity draws me too. And another thing, anybody out there that's got to go to a business meeting or needs to perform for anything, and you might have stage fright or you're worried about a crowd or anything like that, there's a great acting exercise where you get selflessly involved with impulsivity around your environment. So like, you're looking impulsivity as you're like, well, I'm looking at the fan, I'm looking at my microphone right now, I'm looking at Ryan. He's got a, his teeth are straight, and you're just like non-sensory transparency, like, moment to moment. Once you're in that state and you get selflessly involved in that, because you're getting selflessly involved in your environment, a lot of the times you get used to that. A lot of that nervousness goes away.
Interesting. I got to ask about nerves because on your website, I love this story. At age 33, you had $13 in your bank account and you were $3,000 in debt. You decided to start a business selling tarps. Take us to this time. Tell us about this context. I think it was so encapsulating on your website.
So when I started that tool business, my dad would always say, "Hey, I got this tool or that tool." And then when my dad, he was homeless, and we grew up. One thing my mom kept when my parents got divorced, my mom kept the home in Encino. So we were like a poor family, lived in a rich neighborhood. There's a point to this.
Yeah.
So I would grow up around a lot of wealthy people. I was always thinking about what kind of business can I start? So I was thought of around everything from, you name it, ceiling fans when the internet started. But back then it was anything. I was like, well, I'll go into tools because that's what I grew up with. But we all know that I stopped that and I was a nightclub promoter. But I didn't want to be a nightclubber for my whole life because I didn't want to go to like clubs until 4:00 in the morning when I was 50.
Oh yeah.
So I wanted to have a family and all that. And that's, I just didn't want that kind of, so long story short, my dad was living out of a van and he went back in the tool business. Smitty was doing really well with Harbor Freight. Let's sell tools again. He's like, here's this big catalog. I'm buying product from Smitty and all these other guys that import this stuff now. China was opening up and they were importing stuff to get stuff for cheap and then sell it to. And I was looking, I don't want to sell drill bits, man. That's a brace of wheels. And I was like, these tarps, they're colorful. You could use them for so many different applications. Let me go on there. I wish there could be a Charlie Chaplin explanation. Like if you watch the movie Chaplin, the cane just enters into his hand and the mustache comes out of nowhere in the hat. Basically, it was all contrived for him too. And I just said, look, this is the way you figure out a business. There was less competition. I knew I can get the price points down. I knew that my margins would be great because of the price point I can get it. And so Mike Rowe talks about opportunity versus passion. There was most of it was opportunity because without opportunity, I wasn't touching it. But the other thing was like, you could use these things for a lot of purposes. And I also used to donate canned food for the homeless with my nightclubs. Like I get in for half price at one of my big annual events, Turkey Soup, which is a turkey Thanksgiving event. And I said, I could donate these tarps to the homeless because they need tarps in LA area. It gets cold. And so I was like, there's a lot of fun things I could do with it. I think it's a simple product and I could build a website for this. So I chose to do that.
I really respect that because I feel like a lot of people, like when they're starting to think of a business, it's like, oh, what am I passionate about and what can make a shit ton of money really quick? And it's like, oh, like some sort of like SaaS company or something. But these are just tarps. Like these are just simple tarps, but there's so many applications for them. And you saw the opportunity and you seized that and you execute on that just with a simple website, it sounds like.
Yeah. I mean, that, and that's the other thing. It's like people, Gary Vaynerchuk talks about this all the time. People are going for that quick. It's like, you got to play the long game sometimes, and there's so many. Look at Alan Smitty, Harbor Freight. We talk about that guy. He failed with his tool business with my dad in the late 60s. And then he licked his wounds. And in 1975, he started Harbor Freight. It's a multi-billion-dollar company and it's public traded and it's amazing, patience, and you just bide your time and kind of, I've been wanting to, go in a couple different directions because I always want to constantly grow. Yeah. And finally this year we're planning a big product brand launch, which is outside of my company's called Tarps Plus, but now we're starting another company outside of that called Bolator. Yeah. And basically we have our own branded patented product that's, backpack, tarp, cooler related, hammock related, that will hopefully be like the next Yeti, so it's a long game, it takes time to go through all these things sometimes, I mean, there's very few Black Rifle coffees that or like Dr. Squatches that blow up within 2 years.
That's interesting. That's a really good mindset as well. Cause like with my own podcast, I always get asked from friends like, oh, like, have you monetized it yet? Have you monetized it yet? And it's like, no, I haven't. Like I'm 2 years in, maybe I should have by now, but I'm only 23 years old. Like I have a lot of runway here and it's a long game. It's a slow burning process, but I think that's like what comes out to be like the most beautiful product and like something you can be extremely proud of.
Yeah, you know what? And you are biding your time and you are absorbing and you're learning and you're interviewing and you're collecting all you're strategizing, whether you know it or not, And that will all they'll all bleed into each other, right? Because like everything I've ever done has helped the next thing. Yeah. So, and then you might go back to those other things after you do, one thing might be more successful monetarily. But then, spiritually, you might, find, oh, I'm doing much better at this because I did that, so they're all it's all about having a higher consciousness level as far as business is concerned. I think that's really important to never stop learning. And I think that's so important. You got to go outbound. People are like, I read the internet all the time. No, man, like really try to find the fun in really going to seminars and really formally learning every day, pushing yourself out there, not learning to try to meet a narrative, but learning to really absorb, the kind of learning where it hurts you to find out things that maybe you thought were wrong, or things that you were mistaken, but they can help you.
Interesting. We've talked about a lot on this podcast. We're coming to a conclusion here. We've talked about like your early days of like the tool business, how you come from like kind of how to stutter. We talked about you being a director, which I think is so cool. Then we talked about this venture. Reflect back on your life. I mean, is there a time where you think like you grew the most in a certain time frame with any of these?
Yeah. There's intellectual knowledge and then there's physical knowledge, right? So, segues what I was just talking about. So basically, I made my first million. And I said, this is where I go on the offense to try to learn more. I'm going to take some coin and I'm going to spend money on things I want to learn, on self-improvement, things that will improve me, So, big Tony Robbins fan, but I was doing his like tapes and everything for years, but I never went to a seminar. So, but I was like, I'm just going to call up and get a coach because seminars take a lot of time. So I called up the coach. He said, yeah, you've done that. You've done that. I'm like, yeah, I've done it all, man. I listened to it, periodically throughout the years, off and on. But now that I'm like monetarily, financially successful, I want to be able to, invest more in myself like this. He goes, all right, what seminars have you been to? And I was like, I haven't been to any of them. He goes, you haven't been to a seminar? I said, what's the difference? I got it right there on the tape. He goes, no, you don't understand. He goes, you don't understand. You got to go to the seminar because you're immersing yourself and you're going through these situations that are physically getting the knowledge is becoming physical because you're now applying it, you're facilitating it, and it's fast tracking all this conceptualizing that you're doing. It's a big difference, So people say, well, I can conceptualize, something, but if you really force, and this comes back to creating patterns, which is a long journey. You just don't walk out of a seminar, for 5 days and have pattern built, but you'll build some patterns. So that was the big change for me when I started going to the seminars. I did like every seminar Tony Robbins has ever done. I even went to Fiji just because I won a vacation there and just, his resort. He has a big resort in Fiji. That's where he lived. And I did the whole 9, and then I started getting involved with other people like John Gray for relationships. My ex-fiance cheated on me she was a habitual pot smoker. She cheated on me with a guy named Bud. How ironic. And I was like, I got to learn about relationships now. So I studied John Gray, like Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus and Mars in the Bedroom. And I had fun with it, but I really started to physically, understand that conceptual knowledge is different than physical knowledge. And that was a big part of my life. And that was like in my early 30s. That changed. That fast tracked so much of my life.
It was really like immersing yourself within like these seminars is what really fast tracked.
Right. And then you take that mindset, so let's say, you understand, you get together with people and say, how does this work? Like, how can I do this on my own after a while? Because you go to seminars, it's like, you have to force yourself in like, physical situation and it's hard to explain in a short conversation, but making yourself go through the patterns of that really kind of like, and it takes practice to really, it's kind of like a Dickens pattern, Charles Dickens, it's called the Dickens patterns in personal development, where you put yourself in a situation where you add massive leverage towards pain and pleasure towards going in the direction you want to go, massive pain towards going in the direction you don't want to go, and there's a way to physically, where you where you feel the fire, so to speak, on your fingertips. So that's why you don't touch it. So you get good at that by going to seminars or, going to masterminds or, find somebody that personally and then meet them personally so they can like sit down with you a long sustained amount of time. And then immersion too. I'd rather go to something for 5 days straight than go 1 hour a day for like 5 weeks, because immersion is what creates more absorption.
Interesting. That's a really interesting point, because that was one of the reasons I wanted to move down to Austin. Because like I really wanted to immerse myself in a startup culture where everyone's just creating, building. And then I went to like a Capital Factory event like 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, and it's just you immerse yourself in this culture where it's like everyone's building, everyone's creating, everyone's wanting to grow. And it really does, you feel it once you're there. It's like, oh my God, like everyone else is kind of like me. Like I can be myself and like really gain knowledge from other people. It is a beautiful feeling.
It's huge. And that's your peer group now, right? And then, and and their physicality, their physiology, their focus, and their words are congruent to what you want. And most likely towards being, towards successful things, whether it's taking care of the body or their mind or their spirituality, whatever, they're in the right direction. That's your peer group now. That's your environment. You're creating patterns by being immersed in that environment.
Exactly.
That's the difference. That's a big thing.
I love that. And so last question for you. We've talked a lot about personal development. It's one of my favorite topics too. Could you drop like 3 resources? Like what are your 3 favorite videos, documentaries, books, podcasts for personal development?
Okay. Well, of course I'm going to say Tony Robbins, because I've always liked Tony Robbins. He's the, I have a friend, Davin Michaels. He's a authority on outsourcing, and he got involved in the personal development circuit. And he goes, Mike, when it comes to this personal development game, there's Tony Robbins and there's everybody else. It's like he's so there's that guy. But then I would get tap into, we talked about as far as relationships, because the most pain and pleasure you'll probably get in your life is with a relationship. I would study John Gray, along with Chloe Madonis, as far as relationships are concerned. Chloe Madonis is like full 360 experience with family, and you might not think that's important because like, I just want to know about business. I get it. As far as business is concerned, Grant Cardone is pretty cool. Kawasaki, those guys, but, it's so, I would just YouTube the shit out of it. If you're working out, try to work out every day. I would go on your treadmill or try to work out in front of a TV, and I would get your iPhone or your phone and hook it up to YouTube. And I would just be a constant content machine. As far as podcasts are concerned, I don't know, I'm jumping around. I'm just looking for something, constantly like, I like, Gary Vaynerchuk's great for like just pure inspiration sometimes. I like, what's that? It was, oh God, I forgot their names. There's 2 guys that do like, they do like 5-minute marketing podcast, 5-minute spot, like every single day. I forgot, but just, anything, just content. If you're driving, you should be learning content. If you're mowing the lawn, you should be listening to content. You're working out, you should listen to content. So that's my advice as far as, what to do. There's so many, even amateurs have great stuff that, if you feel like just watching somebody with a good, subject matter, you might, things that repeat itself are usually true, more often than not.
Interesting. Well, people want to talk to you about personal development, if they want to hear a joke from you, where can people find you? Where can people connect with you? Thank you so much for joining us on, and please plug them all. I'd love for people to reach out to you.
Longshotleaders.com. That's my podcast website. If you go to longshotleaders.com, and if you got a long shot story, if you're an underdog, somebody that's overcome large obstacles to find success, let us know what that story is, because I'd love to have it on the podcast. But that's where you could find, all my social links and everything, and just kind of like reach out to me if you have a question or whatever.
Perfect. And everyone, those links will be down below. Michael, thank you so much for joining us. This was a great conversation about personal development and so much more. So thank you so much for being here. It was a great episode.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you.
Hey, everybody. Thank you so much for tuning into today's episode with Michael Stein. This was a great conversation about storytelling, mindset, personal development, and entrepreneurship. Michael was a phenomenal storyteller throughout, and it was really fun to hear about his early days, about really overcoming the stutter, really overcoming some insecurities, to developing his first company in the tool business, getting 2 sales in those first like 48 hours, and then really getting into comedy, directing, and now entrepreneurship. If you learned something about any of these topics, make sure to like the video, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell. We have some great guests lined up for you, and we do not want you to miss out on these interviews. If you really love what we're doing, make sure to give it a 5-star rating wherever you get your podcasts. Lastly, while you're here, let's just check out these episodes. We're confident you'll learn something from them as well, and we're excited for you to click. Thank you so much.